much crackhead energy to the shoot.
Clap that ass.
Golf club. Alright, I'm good. My jowls are relaxed. Hi everyone, welcome back to
The Vagilantes!
So today we're going to do an episode on feminism and feminist theory. So I am a women's and gender studies major at school. It's something that's very important to me. I've been doing it for a while now. And I've noticed that there's a lot of different misconceptions about feminism and a lot of different misconceptions about feminists and what we believe. So what do you two think feminism is?
When I think of feminism, I mean the word that comes to mind for me is equality, because that's the kind of feminism that I grew up in, regardless of gender, or maybe keeping gender in mind, that everyone, by virtue of being human, deserves the same opportunities.
Yeah.
I think that the feminist movement at its core is about equality of women on the same level that men have traditionally been treated throughout society, and that includes, of course, trans women and trans women of color. I think that they absolutely have to work the hardest in order to get that same equality that we're working for as women as a whole, and I think that we're all just kind of trying to be equal in life. Yeah.
That's good. Good job. This is a really simple question, right? Like, what is feminism to you? But it actually has a really deep, complex, very varied answer. So there's a lot of different academically agreed upon definitions of feminism, but essentially the main one is really just equality on all fronts, regardless of gender. I know there's a lot of people who disagree with the thought of feminism because they're like, oh, like, I'm egalitarian, or I believe in this or this or this. That's fine. Feminism at its core is about just equality, but it is about equality looking at things through a gendered lens, which is important because it is something that impacts all of us. I used to have a significant other who said, I'm not a feminist. Big red flag. He said, I'm not a feminist because I believe in other things too, like I believe in environmental justice, or I believe in pacifism, like I believe like war shouldn't happen and things like that. But
You can't believe in feminism too.
you can also believe in feminism, but not only that, feminism is overarchingly important to all of those things. You know, women consistently, or people who identify as women consistently, are impacted by the environment at a level that sometimes is greater than men's. There's been lots of work done on this. Actually, I've done a video about this, PCBs and mother's breast milk. And women have been impacted by war in different ways too, different from men, in ways that we don't see. So different issues impact people of different genders differently. That's a lot of differences, but feminism is a great uniting factor. That being said, there are definitely issues in feminism that, you know, are important even among feminists. But I just wanted to dispel a few myths first. What do you think of when I say the term feminazi?
Just from the sound of it, that sounds like a word that somebody on the far right would use to describe a feminist who thinks that all men are evil and that the opposite sex and that all opposite genders from women, that's not even a thing, but you know what I mean? Like all genders that are not women genders are worse, and that they should just kind of get away, you know, like all men are trash, that whole thing, and that people would describe a feminazi as someone who pushes that idea that women are supposed to be the superior and are supposed to wipe out all other genders.
Right.
I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah.
I've heard that word used. I've had it used towards me.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, like, but you know, given that kind of context, I understand why like that was leveled, because I understand how, like, you know, especially doing the kinds of things that we do where we're, you know, outspoken on a certain level and to a certain demographic of people that maybe otherwise wouldn't encounter that kind of philosophy.
No, that's good, that's good. That is generally what it means. And one of the reasons that a lot of young people are fearing calling themselves feminists is because they're afraid of the term feminazi, right? Like, I've met people who are like, oh, I agree with feminism, just not certain parts of it. Like, yeah, that's fine. I, for example, agree with environmental activism, but there are certain parts of it where I'm just like, that's a little too far, you know, like maybe like you deprive like a coal mining community of their life source, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can agree with the general core of something and not have to agree with the whole thing. I was scared of that term for a while. My first ever published feminist piece, it was called The Other F Word, about feminism. I submitted it to our school paper before I ever got to school, and I was so scared that people wouldn't want to be my friend that I asked the editor to not publish my name with it. I was so scared. I wanted to write it anonymously. I was like, I don't want feminists to be associated with me at all. And when she published it, she forgot that request. And I saw it in the paper, and it was like, "Why should it be Skeewiff very blatantly. I was like, oh no. I was like, oh my gosh. And so many people thanked me for writing that piece, right? Because when one person accepts that label, other people are more able to. Feminism at its core is really about equality, but it's people who don't feel that. When you have privilege, equality feels like oppression. Those feelings are understandable, but it's important to look at the different perspectives, right? Okay, so now we're going to move on to feminist theory. When I say feminism, like the history of feminism, people usually think of waves. First wave, second wave, now we're in third wave feminism. What do you know about like the waves of feminism?
At least in my high school and middle school education, until I got to college, we only looked at it in a US context. And so not only was it defined, you know, first wave, second wave, third wave, without kind of giving thought to how those barriers blended together, but also we only talked about it in a US context, so it was constrained by the temporal and geographic boundaries of the United States, which is just such a reductionist way of thinking. Which is why, you know, I love talking to you about this, mostly listening to you, because you bring like such a, you know, such a complex and nuanced perspective to something that I didn't really get in school. Yeah, you summed it up great.
Yeah. So you're right. So the waves metaphor is quite limiting for feminism, but we will talk about that in a second because we still do have to use it to talk about what feminism is.
Yeah.
So here I have a diagram of just three waves. And these are going to represent the three different waves of feminism. So can you two tell me what you thought like happened in the first wave?
So the first wave was, from my knowledge, around the 1910s.
Okay, yeah,
And it was about suffrage, women's right to vote, and
Yes.
women's rights to be, you know, equal citizens in the eyes of the government.
Yeah, so generally the first wave was about suffrage. Can you tell me what the second wave was about?
Was that like labor equality?
Yeah, kind of, yeah, labor equality. Labor equality, like general like feminist presence in universities, institutions, stuff like that. And third wave feminism, which is right now, as you can see, it is unlabeled because we're living it. So third wave feminism is really about like unifying. There's no one set issue. It's really like, you know, the Me Too movement. It's about mass mobilization, and we can't obviously say what it is about because we're currently living through it, and we never know what will happen tomorrow, right? One of the problems with using wave metaphors for feminism is that it is unnecessarily simplified, right? Like for example, like we had a problem, we solved it. We had a problem, we solved it, right? But oftentimes, like when a wave comes up and crashes down, that water still exists, like in the general ocean, right? Does that make sense? We still do have these problems. Like they're not necessarily fully solved. We still do have them. And on top of that, so Katie was mentioning this, but the wave metaphor looks at issues from a really white, middle class perspective, right? Like here, like for example, voting rights. Like white women did not have the right to vote. White women now have the right to vote. White women like were not able to learn about women's and gender studies and labor equality and things like that. And now white women do. Third wave feminism is a little more egalitarian, but up until now, like the different issues that we faced have been defined by what is most important to that specific class. Does that make sense? And there's nothing wrong with being white women. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, you know, fighting for rights and what you believe is right. But one of the things that's wrong about this metaphor is that it says that we have a problem, we solved it. And then we chill for some time, right? And then we have another problem, we solved it, and then we chill for some more time, right? When in reality, feminism never chills, and problems are happening all the time, right? Like even now, like, you know, there's certain communities of black people that are essentially disenfranchised because of voter ID laws or because of voting registration or things like that, right? And even here, like, there's obviously people who don't have the opportunity to learn about women's and gender studies in school, and women of color still make less than white women. There's just a lot of legislation that's lacking in terms of women's rights, like for example, the ERA. And so it's not necessarily we have a problem, we solved it, because we always have problems. And it also doesn't show us the true magnitude, right? Like not every feminist was working on suffrage at this time, right? There were like Ida B. Wells, for example. There are definitely people who are working on other issues pertaining to women of color, disenfranchised women, women of, you know, various different ethnicities and classes, but we don't see those because we just see suffrage, or we just see like labor rights, or we just see like whatever we're seeing now, right? That's why it's kind of detrimental to use that wave metaphor, but it's important in understanding the history of feminism. What metaphor do you think we should use to explain feminism?
You know, I think that using the language of waves like this, from a language and linguistic standpoint, like words carry so much connotation and they carry so much meaning to them. Traditionally, white women of the middle class are more okay with using a wave metaphor traditionally because they think, oh, that's how it looks for me, that's how it's fine for me. But women of color, specifically trans women of color, are like, oh my goodness, this is absolutely not the right metaphor. I've been continuously fighting this since I was, this age. This wave metaphor is just not doing linguistic justice, and it's not doing these women justice.
Good on you. Thank you for sharing that, because I had not analyzed it from that perspective.
If we want to stick with the water, how about a ripple metaphor? Waves kind of, as you said, there's a beginning and then there's a peak and then there's an end. But with ripples, you never really have, they kind of blend together. And one thing that I think the wave narrative kind of reinforces is this kind of progress narrative of history, which is something that...
not necessarily the case.
Exactly. And that's a kind of very, Euro and US-centric kind of view of history.
Right, and history does repeat itself.
Absolutely.
That's really good. To be real, like, I have no idea what to use, but there's lots of smart feminists who do. And there's a lot of people who theorize on a new model to settle on, but one of the more widely accepted ones is a kaleidoscope model. Because like a kaleidoscope, there's different issues that phase in and out, different things that have significance at a certain time and not significant at another time. When you look through a kaleidoscope, you can always see most, if not all of them. As you turn, like as the hands of time turn, different things become more or less significant, but they're all always there. So it is important, I think, to discuss feminism in a way that recognizes everyone's accomplishments and recognizes the vast array of human experiences. But I do understand why we simplify it to make it into waves. It's just important to recognize that people have a variety of different experiences and they're all important in the fight for equality. We just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this video and to understand the different ways that we discuss feminism. There's a lot of misconceptions about that topic, and now more than ever, it's important to understand what we mean when we say, I am a feminist.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another video from the Vagilantes. Please be sure to watch out for another upcoming video talking also about feminism. For now, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and keep a watch out for more content. And for now, that's all from the Vagilantes.